All right, bye weeks are here. Injuries are piling up, but I've got some plays in week 5 that can save your squad. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Fantasy Bankroll. I'm Robert Banker. Let's jump straight into my Bullish Report and some of the players I'm riding with this week. Let's go. All right, the first player on my bullish list this week, Los Angeles Chargers quarterback Justin Herbert. Now, the Chargers and Herbert are coming off their first loss of the season, but they get to travel home and take on a Commanders defense that's given up 19.2 fantasy points per week to the quarterback position. And I think this week, Herbert looks more like the MVP candidate he did the first 3 weeks when he was averaging 286 yards and 2 touchdowns per game. All right, the next player on my bullish list for week 5, Seattle Seahawks quarterback Sam Darnold. Now, Darnold faces a Bucs defense in week 5 that's giving up almost 19 fantasy points per week to the quarterback position. In the last 3 weeks after a week 1 dud, Darnold's averaged 252 yards and almost 2 touchdowns per game. So I'm expecting a top 10 finish for Darnold this week. The next player on my bullish list for week 5, Detroit Lions running back Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, the Bengals are giving up a ridiculous 26 fantasy points per week to the running back position. And after a week 1 dud in Green Bay, the Lions and Gibbs are averaging over 40 points per game, with Gibbs scoring 4 touchdowns during that span. And even though it pains me to say this as a Bengals fan, if you have Jahmyr Gibbs on your team, he's a must-start this week. All right, the next player on my bullish list for week 5, New York Giants running back Cam Scatterbo. Now, despite getting their first win of the season last week, it was tough sledding for Scatterbo in the Giants running game against the Chargers, as they only averaged 3.8 yards per carry as a team. Now, this week they get to face a Saints team that's bottom third in the league in regards to fantasy points allowed to the running back position on a weekly basis. And with Jackson Dart only getting his second start of his career, I expect the Giants to lean on the run game as much as possible. The first wide receiver on my bullish list for week 5, Houston Texans wide receiver Nico Collins. Now, it sounds weird to say this, but the Ravens defense has been horrendous to start the season. They're bottom 5 in fantasy points allowed on a weekly basis to wide receivers, including being dead last in red zone points allowed to wide receivers. And Nico Collins, after a slow start in week 1, is averaging 78 yards and almost 1 touchdown per game. The next player on my week 5 bullish report, Los Angeles Chargers wide receiver Quentin Johnston. Now, Johnson's finally turned into the player that the Chargers thought he would be when they drafted him, ranking 5th in the league in receiving yards through the first 4 weeks. And this week he's at home facing a Commanders D that's giving up 24.1 points on a weekly basis to the wide receiver position. And with all the weapons, it makes it hard for defenses to solely focus on Johnston, so I expect another big week for him in week 5. All right, the next player on my bullish report for week 5, Miami Dolphins tight end Darren Waller. Now, the Panthers are bottom 5 in fantasy points allowed on a weekly basis to the tight end position. And with the Cheetah being out for the season, there's targets to go around. And we saw last week that Waller can still make plays on offense, especially in the red zone, scoring 2 touchdowns. And I wouldn't be surprised if he adds at least 1 more this week against the Panthers. All right, the last player on my bullish report for week 5, Buffalo Bills tight end Dalton Kincaid. Now, the Patriots have been giving up almost 10 fantasy points per week to the tight end position, which ranks 24th in the league. And despite only having 1 catch last week, it did go for a touchdown. And he's now scored a touchdown in 3 or 4 games this season, leading the team. And I wouldn't bet against his hot start continuing this week. So if you have Kincaid, start him. All right, that wraps up my week 5 bullish report on Fantasy Bankroll. Make sure you check out my bearish report for the players I'm avoiding this week. And let's go.